topic is meal frequency, and meal frequency itself is not an easy topic, right? You got some people who say 1 meal a day. You got some people who say 8 meals a day. And I mean, have you guys done both?
I've tried it all.
I've done it all, right? We're all like the same size. Literally, we're the same size and height. And before I came here, actually, before these guys came, Andy and Paul, everyone in the lab was like 6 foot something. I'm like 5'8", 180 and stuff like that. And then I was like, cool, these guys are literally exact anthropometrics as I am. So, but anyhow, I know myself. I mean, I've done probably like 10, 12 meals a day before. Set an alarm clock and eat in the middle of the night. But let's go over these studies. Let's see what the data says, and I'm going to go ahead and interpret the data. So if we talk about the first study is, one of the questions have is, if I lower my meal frequency, will I lose muscle mass, right? So if I lower my meal frequency, will I lose muscle mass? Well, basically the study that was done showed the answer was no. So these were bodybuilders, and they were typically eating 12, 13, 14, 15 hours a day, and they switched that and they cut it down. They could only eat in a 9-hour feeding period. Now they maintained their normal calories, and they maintained their training stimulus, and they didn't lose any lean mass. So you're not going to lose lean mass necessarily when you do something like a 9-hour feeding period. So that's what we talked about yesterday. Let's go on the reverse end of it. What happens if you increase meal frequency? Do you increase fat loss? Now I know when I was basically coming up in bodybuilding, the thought is that if you have 2 meals, you only stoke the furnace twice, right? So if you go 3 meals, 4 meals, 5, 6, you're stoking the furnace several times, and therefore you should have the thermic effect of food, and you should increase metabolism. So Dr. Brad Schoenfeld came out with Alan Aragon and some of his colleagues, and they published a meta-analysis and looked at the dose of 1 to 2 meals a day versus like 3 to 4 meals a day versus greater than 5 meals a day. And what they basically found is that increasing meal frequency did not increase fat loss. So that's a real interesting. Now some studies might have, but some studies show the complete opposite of that. So in general, the overview is that increasing meal frequency did not increase fat loss. So again, we're going to interpret this. We will interpret this in a second. But it doesn't seem to necessarily be necessary. Now, the third study, which is going to go up today, is going to talk about how frequent do you really need to eat. So there's a recent intermittent fasting study that came out, and the intermittent fasting study essentially had where they limited their feeding period to 4 hours, and they compared it to a limitation of more like where they could only eat for 8 or 9 hours a day.
At will.
Ad libitum. Okay. Yeah. So basically, this study had 4 hours feeding period versus at will, and intriguingly enough, basically the higher meal frequency group was able to gain muscle. The lower meal frequency group did lose fat. They lost a substantial amount of fat. It's important to understand, but they couldn't gain muscle. So when you lowered your window to 4 hours, they couldn't gain muscle, but they were able to lose fat. Okay? So interpretation of this is that essentially, you can only limit your meal frequency so much if you're trying to gain muscle. Probably if you're trying to gain muscle, you can't really limit it for more than 9, 10 hours. If you're actually trying to gain muscle, where you're fasting maybe no more than 15 hours. Because that 4-hour winning period is too much. Now, if you talk anecdotally, Erin Stern actually came in, and she was actually going in. We're on the same page. Yeah. Erin Stern just came in the other day. If you're watching, hey, what's up, Erin? She's going to be coming in the lab a lot. We're doing some cool stuff, some cool research, and some cool talk shows as well. But anyway, Erin pointed out that when she was doing the 4-hour feeding period, she was progressively losing a little bit of lean mass. And I think it gets harder for competitors at that level. That it's not just that it's hard to maintain, but if you mess up a day, especially if you're dieting, you're going to lose some muscle. Last thing that we're posting tomorrow actually is a study by Costel. Classic study by Costel, one of the best exercise physiologists, if not the best exercise physiologist of all time, published a study in 1981. And basically what he looked at was the impact of meal frequency on replenishment of your carbohydrate stores, like how fast you replenish your carbs. And he did like 1 to 2 meals versus like several feedings, like 5 to 7 meals. Same amount of carbohydrates, he found that both equally replenished muscle glycogen stores. So the take-home message that is like, if your meal frequency is not going to enhance glycogen replenishment. So by this, a lot of you might be saying, oh, you know, it doesn't matter. I can go low meal frequency. You know, I could go high meal frequency. There's not much of a difference between the two. We need to really analyze this, okay? Number one, interpreting things this way. If I lower meal frequency to, say, a 4-hour window, I might lose a lot of fat, okay? I may lose some muscle with that, but I'm certainly not going to gain muscle with that unless you're really genetically gifted, okay? Inevitably, I would lose muscle. But if you're trying to lose fat in a quick period of time, the 4-hour feeding period might be good. And to be honest, you might not lose muscle, okay? So now, going on the next thing, if you're trying to gain muscle or and lose fat at the same time, the 8 to 9 hour fasting window may be beneficial because that's probably somewhat of a middle ground, okay? And increasing meal frequency to higher levels than that is probably not going to be, it's not going to enhance fat loss. So, I talked to Andy the other day and he pointed out something that was very, very important. He said that acute increases in protein synthesis. When I say acute, it means like I drink protein shake and I train, or I do a training session. And that acute increase in protein synthesis, basically, that you see, you would think would relate to long-term muscle growth. Turns out there's very little relation. And people are like, wait a second, isn't protein synthesis muscle growth on a micro level? The answer is, yeah, it is. The problem is that the answer to your question is we adapt. What you see short-term may not reflect the adaptations that happen long-term. And in diets, you might adapt in 2 weeks to the diet, right? You know, in training, you might adapt in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks to the training stimulus. So that short-term stimulus of protein synthesis is not going to predict long-term. My brother's dissertation, for example, showed that if you took, he had 3 meals, and when you spiked in between meals with branched-chain amino acids, it increased overall protein balance. That's good for muscle growth, you would think long-term. Pat and Jones found the same thing. If you, in between meals, you had amino acids, it was better for overall protein synthesis 24 hours. But you adapt. So what this tells me is this. You adapt to anything. To keep the system sensitive, it's likely instead of adopting one pattern over another, if you want to optimize muscle size and fat loss, you should essentially periodize. Maybe go 1 month with low meal frequency. Sensitize the system, and then introduce, and that might be more of a fat loss, insulin sensitizing month, and then introduce to the system higher meal frequency, 4, 5, 6 meals. Inevitably, you will see a lot of muscle growth on that month. When you go back to the low meal frequency, you will actually get a lot of fat loss. So that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make here. And there is evidence on a molecular level that does support that. Because like when you go on a fasting stage, you turn on stress responses that make your muscle increase mitochondria, insulin sensitivity. There's evidence that if I fast, that my muscle will rebound and have more protein synthesis to adapt when I eat again. So if you're going to go, it's not either or, it's both. And so that's my recommendation is periodize, maybe a month on low meal frequency, a month high meal frequency. Maybe every once in a while, 1 or 2 weeks, very low meal frequency. So guys, that's the end of this Muscle PhD talk. I'm going to go ahead and answer your questions live now. So just take them from here.
Do you have some on screen? Yeah, go ahead and start there if you do.
Okay, so Carla goes, periodization is a key. I totally agree. Go ahead and scroll up and look at some of these questions here. So someone goes, Andrew Dewey goes, what about gaining lean mass? Andrew, I think the periodization technique is ideal for gaining lean mass. You're basically going to want to, like, to sensitize system, go lower meal frequency. When you want to ramp up for mass, up the meal frequency. How do you look on meal timing from day to day? I know some research show a lot of problems with digestion, etc. when the timing change. Yeah, I mean, what I'm going to say is this: I do think that you get into, there's evidence that you have like clock genes that express themselves based on your meal pattern and your feeding. So, which is part of the adaptation process. So it is good to have a set schedule so you don't freak your body out and stress it out. Yes. So I do think having somewhat of a set pattern, whether it's low meal frequency or high meal frequency, and sleep in general is a good thing to do. And that was Alexander. Patrick Holstein says, would it be beneficial to eat less frequent if shredding for a bodybuilding competition? Patrick, I do think it would be beneficial, but maybe like, again, even in the middle of that contest prep, maybe one or two times or for a week, you might up meal frequency for a little bit, just to make sure you're maintaining the lean mass, and then go back down. And in fact, there's evidence that like if you up your meal frequency to normal twice a week, that could maintain a lot of fat loss benefits. He goes, by the way, I have the most awesome chocolate ball recipe in my Instagram account, at the Academy Athlete. Cool, man, I'll check it out. I'll definitely check that out. I'm all about chocolate.
We'll make it.
Yeah,
Chocolate.
we'll make it. If you guys have good recipes, shoot them to us, like he did. Grant says, what can be done to increase metabolism? Periodize your diet. Don't do linear diets. Like, don't just keep decreasing calories. You need to cycle back up at least twice a week, up your calories to maintenance. So that's what studies show. Doc, I love the content. What's your recommendation on protein? This is Lynn. Doc, I love your content. What's your recommendation on protein intake frequency and the amount as far as time between meals and grams per meal to maximize muscle protein synthesis for male and female, and the impact on, I'm guessing, overall muscle growth? That's a great question. As far as overall protein intake, I think a gram or maybe 2 grams per kilogram body weight. I think anywhere from 0.8 grams to 1 gram per pound is going to be like your standard. Now, that's for males and females. Now, if you're trying to lose fat, and every once in a while, Dr. Joey Antoni's research shows you can go above that. So in other words, you might try 1.5 to 2 grams per pound of body weight of protein. You'll lose fat, and it's hard. Or if you're coming out of a contest, it'll be hard to gain fat. But again, like anything else, you will adapt to that, okay? So there's research demonstrating that basically by Tipton, that basically if you have very high protein intake and then you come back down, you'll lose muscle. So don't stay there too long. It's, again, a periodized type of issue. So go through some periods where you're high, 1.5 to 2, but then go through periods of time where you're going to be more like 1 gram per pound, and periodize that. Train in a fasted period or train during your 4 to 5 eating period, or should you take that day off? Personally, if you're eating 4 or 5 hour eating period, I would train during that time, or train right before it and eat right after. You don't want to there's enough studies that show training in a fasted state and waiting 12 hours is not anabolic. You know what? I don't think it takes. Yeah, if you think about it, that's probably not anabolic. So. But I don't know I would take the day off, but I definitely recommend that I would,
Let me expand on that question a little bit
more.
Yeah, go
expand on that question.
So, for a trained individual, protein synthesis has been shown to be reduced long-term after training. However, in an untrained individual, it's been shown to be longer.
Good point. Good point. What Andy's pointing out is that the more well-trained you are, the more timing matters, period. So if you are well trained, you definitely need to eat in that 4 to 5 hour period. If you're not well trained, you can get away with murder. To be quite honest, you can be on the Bowflex, you can whatever and get gains. But if you're well trained, I think timing matters. I think timing matters. You heard it here first. Yes, I'm going to get hate mail on that. When lean bulking, is there a meal frequency that you recommend to maximize muscle growth and minimize fat gain? Yep, I would say 8 to 9 hour period of feeding if your goal is like lean bulking. right? And then, but again, follow the technique that I said. Every once in a while, up your meal frequency to more than that.
Here's a good question from Chill Therapy. People with our cryo.
Chill therapy, cool.
So, if looking at the benefits of IF, would 40 calories of half and half in the morning with coffee be too many calories to break a fast?
You know, so technically, if you're eating something, you're like breaking the fast. But to be quite honest, like 40 calories of like an MCT as like coffee with MCTs. MCTs aren't even processed like a normal fat, so they may not be sensed like normally, like you would have and go through the processes. I think, in fact, you would get all the same benefits of the fast. Going out on a limb based on Wolf's research, no, you don't worry about that. Have your 40 calories. Rather than use carbs as a post-workout insulin spike, could I use L-leucine as a good replacement so I can stay in ketosis? Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think post-workout, Volix data shows you can have fat and be just fine. Great question. Also, if you had like exogenous ketones after you worked out, that actually would drive glucose into the cell. Ellingson asked, would calorie cycling every other day be good for fat loss? 1 day maintenance calories, next day deficit, and rotating like that? Yes. There's lots of studies with every other day deficits and then normal eating. So Ellingson, absolutely. Check out Verity's work. A lot of good research on that. Would a 5-day high MPS 2-day intermittent fast work? Nathan, I'm assuming that what you're talking about basically is like for putting on lean mass. So you have high meal frequency, 5 days a week, like 5 days a week. But eventually you're going to become sensitized to that and you're going to stop making gains. So what you're saying is 2 days a week, go low meal frequency, like 2 meals a day. Would that help you maintain your sensitivity to high meal frequency? The answer, Nathan, is very likely yes. Great call. Excellent. Do it. Claren McKenna says, when you refer to changing meal frequency, do you change the calories as well? If you're trying to lose fat and you're lowering meal frequency to lose fat, I think it's a really good idea. There is evidence that if you're bulking, that's why the question on lean bulking, that if you were limiting your time to 9-10 hours, you'll gain less fat. So that's with the same amount of calories. So if you're trying to prevent fat gain, less meal frequency could be beneficial. If you're a hard gainer and fat gains doesn't matter, the higher meal frequency, again, I'd recommend. In fact, that's what I recommend for like gaining mass. Again, go through a month period of time where you're having higher meal frequency. If you guys have questions, you can hit me too. So Marvin Hank Kirschner says, should we aim for specific leucine content per meal, and does it change with the higher lean body mass? Yeah, for a guy my size, like 180 pounds, you're talking about 2 to 3 grams of leucine per meal, which is going to be equivalent to about 20 grams, 20 to 30 grams of high quality protein, of high quality like milk-based protein, 30 to 40 grams of more meat-based protein. Yeah, if you're bigger, if you're like 220 or something, I'd shoot for like 3 to 4 grams per meal. Good question.
Here's one. High-fat breakfast. Does introducing carbs in breakfast have a negative effect on how you utilize energy throughout the day?
Does having carbs with breakfast have an effect?
Yes.
Yeah, actually, a lot of the benefits of intermittent fasting are the restriction from carbohydrates. So basically, there's a study by Wolf that showed that you get all the benefits of fasting from carb restriction. So, and there's research from Molly Bray's lab which demonstrate that if you wake up in the morning with more of a high-fat, low-carb meal, even if you keep all your carbs the same the rest of the day, you'll actually favor the utilization of fat the rest of the day. Basically, it seems that our system is programmed to utilize the types of calories it eats from the onset of awakening. So basically, what I'm basically saying is, yeah, have a low-carb breakfast, even if you're a high-carber, and you're going to get a lot leaner. Nathan Michaels goes, you rock, brother. Nathan, you rock, man. I really I appreciate that, man. Thank you. Concerning autophagy. Oh, good. Here we go. Cool question. I don't know what it is, but it starts off good. Could a 5-day multiple meal, 2-day intermittent fasting do something similar to 4 weeks on and off? So basically what Nathan's referring to is when you fast, there's a process called autophagy. Autophagy is a cell cleansing process. Basically, you are breaking down machinery in the cell that is damaged, misfolded, and you clear that out. Well, the problem is when you're turning on anabolic systems, you're not in a catabolic state. Autophagy is a catabolic state. So if you're constantly eating high meal frequency, you're not going to get as much autophagy, which is that cleansing of the cell, the cleaning out, breaking down damaged mitochondria and replacing it. So basically, yeah, so if you do 2 days a week where your meal frequency is low, you'll allow that to occur. And that is going to basically allow you to maximize protein synthesis the other 5 days a week. So great question, Nathan. I still think probably at least a month out of the year I go lower meal frequency. Periodization is always key. So switch those ratios every once in a while. And certainly you're going to see probably more muscle growth when you have that higher meal frequency when you come off the low meal frequency. But again, periodize. Would you say kiwi fruit in a meal during keto would be too much natural sugar to offset ketogenesis? I mean, it depends on who you are. If you had some kiwi fruit around a workout, you're probably going to be just fine, you know, so I wouldn't freak out about it. Be your own scientist, monitor your own blood levels. That's the key. Let me answer what you think. 3 more?
Yeah, we'll go 3 more.
All right. Nicholas
Get them in.
Kochovic asks, what about a 9 to 10 hour feeding window on training days and like 4 hours eating window on rest days? I think that's brilliant. I think it's a good, I mean, yeah, absolutely. Now, see, you guys are, I love it. I love it. Good, that's creative. That would work. Carla asks, would you recommend intermittent fasting for those who want to lose hypertrophy and lose fat? Why would you want to stop hypertrophy? But okay, you know what? Let's say so. Listen, it happens. It's not something I've never contemplated it. I wish that I had that problem, but but anyway. But you know, some people seriously, like, on a more serious note, there are, like, if you're a figure competitor or you're a bikini competitor, certainly it's all about symmetry. So maybe your shoulders are a little bit too big. You know, maybe your quads are overwhelming your hamstrings or your glutes. And so for you, you may want to lose some muscle. So in that case, I would say a 4-hour feeding period for a longer duration of time is going to help you lose fat. And if you stop concentrating, I'm not going to say it's going to be catabolic to those areas drastically, but if you stop focusing on those areas as much through your training, that would likely be a recipe for catabolism, for muscle loss. Opinion on amino acids in a fasted state or fed. What is more beneficial for fat loss? I mean, again, if you're trying to reset the clock, like I'm saying, I probably would do a normal fasting period, right? So I'm not like a huge fan of it. But I do think that every once in a while, maybe a modified, like if you're going to do 4-hour feeding period, maybe during the 9-hour feeding period, maybe you throw in amino acid feeding. But you know, I'm not like the hugest fan of it. But I don't think it's going to stunt fat loss. For a beginner, what's the best recommendation for gaining muscle, losing fat? That's a huge question. Follow the Muscle PhD Academy. We'll roll with that. We're going to launch musclephd.com soon, David. And actually check out, it's an advanced program, but check out, I highly recommend checking out Project Mass on bodybuilding.com because we do cover a lot of those basics that are in there. Is meal frequency or meal window more important? I'm assuming, Daphne, that you're talking about, like, is a window, like eating around your training session, more important? Again, I would say if you're well trained, meal feeding around a workout is extremely important. They're different variables. They're both important. Does eating carbs later in the day increase fat storage? No. That was the quickest response I've gotten.
No.
Like, that's the quickest response I've ever done.
You've done a yes/no before.
Okay, that's true. Okay.
But no one likes yes/no.
No one likes
yes/no. That's why they're here.
Okay. So, okay, this is the last question that I'm gonna answer. Brandon Roberts goes, "What's your interpretation of new studies showing that high-fat post-exercise meal blunts anabolic signaling?" Basically, just to let you know, most studies that say high-fat are high-fat, high-carb. And so high-fat, high-carb meals, the combination of the two, cause a lot of oxidative stress they impair insulin signaling immediately, they impair blood flow immediately, they impair vasodilation immediately, and that's why that would decrease blood flow and therefore protein synthesis. If it is high fat, low carb, you're not going to get an impairment in anabolic signaling.
And I would even go into the add, even if it's a high intensity training session, then you may even have blunt anabolic signaling as well, because high intensity training decreases insulin sensitivity, correct?
Oh, like the muscle damaging exercise does that as well. Absolutely, it's a good point. So Brandon, that's a good question. Again, if basically what it's saying is don't eat pizza post workout unless it's really low carb or low fat, high protein.